Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours. Normally we start with announcements and highlights. Probably the biggest one there is that we shipped 4.6.0, so go Teddy, go Thor. I think the two of you probably do most of the work on those right now.
I feel like I did very little work here. It's a combination of Stefano's work for publishing artifacts in the CI. I just grabbed the macOS one from there. It's a very big milestone for us. And of course, you put up the changelog. That used to be a huge effort, but now we have the tooling, and it's just a couple quick edits inside the GitHub web UI. So yeah, it's kind of smooth sailing.
A little better
Awesome.
each time.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I was still under the impression that it was like a huge manual process, and I was ready to get on this meeting and say, like, what do we need to do to fix this?
It could be better, but it inches forward.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Stefano, for getting that done.
No problem. We maybe can make, if there's anything else we can do, if we can make a list of things.
I feel like signing is still the big one. I'm probably supposed to make a profile so that we can start signing with a dev key on CI. We still think that's a good idea? I think so.
I think so too. We've talked about, this is a big discussion. We could maybe have it later on in the meeting, but I think that the next small step here is the Linux packages don't have debug symbols. So we're building with release instead of release with debug info. And so we can't produce the debug symbol and then debug info version of the Debian package or the RPM. If we switched that, and there's some technical rationale for why that's challenging, but if we switch that, then we could grab all the Linux artifacts too, and that release process would be just a little bit easier.
Yeah, on that note, I think we can add a new job that builds Osquery Linux only, builds it on rel with the binfo, but without the tests, because those are the ones that take the most amount of space, and so the disk space should be enough in that case. And I can also move the generation of packages from the release build to the other job, because we will not have a use for that. Yeah, so that way you will be able to use the packages directly. Again, we are only using 6 out of 10 parallel jobs, so we can do that. Obviously, we lose one job for multiple runs running together, but given also that we are not building and linking tests, it should be a little bit faster, and Linux in general is faster. I also think I will remove any check like CPP check. I will not have it run there, so it should be pretty fast.
That sounds outstanding.
Yeah, it sounds great to me. I think it's definitely worth the extra parallel job.
Any other announcements or highlights? Okay.
I can make a quick announcement. Not super important, but just so people know. I think I'm back at Facebook. I think that already came up in core, but in case it didn't, I can work on stuff again. That was all.
Now that Apple has a corporate CLA signed.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, we're glad to see you back. We're glad to see you back, Nick. So.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, just in time. So I have good timing. You'll learn that about me.
I bet your Windows code signing key hasn't even expired.
No, it's still valid, baby. Love it. And now I can renew it in March. It's great. Have a company who might actually pay for it.
Do you have Osquery on the wall behind you?
Yeah, that was one of the banners from the very first QueryCon.
Oh, did we send it to you? That was nice.
No, I snagged it on my way out. I don't remember who it was. Somebody was very generous and was like, "Here, just take this."
It's probably
I was like,
Antigone.
thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, then they didn't have any banners, and we had to write it the next year. That's why.
This is because I took it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're like, we only had 2 banners. Can't do a con with this.
I only got 2. Classic Nick.
Okay, so next section is sort of questions, issues, PRs. Really, the intent here is for kind of those of us that aren't in core. So anyone joining in, if you've got any questions, Danny, I think you're joining us. So welcome to Office Hours. Please stop by often. If you've got any questions, anything you want to talk about, now's a great time.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'll introduce myself quick. In case you don't recognize the weird accent, I'm based in Cape Town in South Africa, and I'm an SRE for Grafana Labs. Yeah, you know, I've been following Osquery for like 5 years. And I've been looking for an excuse to like roll it out wherever I work. So now that I'm at Grafana, I'm trying to weasel it in there. No promises, but you know, so I'm slowly trying to think of use cases that might work for us. And I actually had some questions for you guys. I don't know if this is the right forum for this necessarily, but I watched the previous office hours, and there was talk about like how do we position the architecture, you know, and how do we explain to people like how are you supposed to deploy Osquery like in a big environment and so on. And so one thing that I was thinking about, since I work with Prometheus every day, has there been any thinking around the way that scheduled queries work? So the way that I understand it is with OSQuery D, you set up a bunch of scheduled queries, and then it will write those to a log, and then it's your responsibility to aggregate those logs into some central location, and then you query them that way. Is that right so far? More or less?
More or less.
Okay. And then if you want to run like ad hoc queries, then you need to have a centralized controller that all the nodes, you know, register in with, and then you can do like a scatter gather type of thing. So I see that somebody has written an exporter for Osquery. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with the concept of exporters in Prometheus. Should I just quickly cover that? So with Prometheus, Prometheus is a pull-based model instead of a push-based model. So Prometheus, you tell it which endpoints to go and hit, and there's a standard exposition format that you give back to Prometheus. And so you give your time series data and all your metrics. And so it will pull from all the different places. And so usually you would do things like, you know, you would set up an application, and you would have your application expose a bunch of metrics and tell Prometheus to pull it. But now you've got Osquery, which doesn't have those metrics exposed. And you would want to expose certain metrics based on some queries that the user wants to set up. So basic example, like show me the number of users that are currently logged in, right? And I want to have this, I want to have Osquery deployed like across my whole fleet. So I would have Osquery running, and then I would have this exporter, and that exporter would query Osquery and produce those metrics in the Prometheus exposition format. And then Prometheus would go and grab them from all of those locations, centralize all that data, and then you can access the metrics that way. So it does, the downside of that is that you don't get the nice SQL interface when you want to actually interrogate the data. But I think in a lot of cases where I've wanted to use Osquery, like I have the queries that I want to run up front, and I set those up, and then I just want to get the results in some way, and then just work with the results. I haven't really had a lot of need for like ad hoc queries across the infrastructure. Anyway, so let me just pause there for a second. Is that roughly making sense?
Sort of. Hi, I'm Seth. I've been in SRE at various companies for a while and have done some Prometheus deployments and Grafana work, though not at my current job. At some level, it makes sense. So here's how I think about Osquery, right? I think about Osquery as being effectively an API translation layer that on one end uses SQL and then on the back end kind of talks to whatever OS and third-party APIs people have written tables for. So sort of when I think of it as an API translation layer, it makes it very easy for me to say, oh, I want to get this metric. If I'm thinking about, let me use Osquery as the endpoint CPU uptime, metric puller, right? You could do that, but you also see people doing much more complicated things with Osquery, right? More often as things like, please find me all of the files that were downloaded from our production website and stored on encrypted on disk, right? So that use case doesn't seem like it fits Prometheus very well, but the use cases around, well, what would it be like using Osquery as, I don't know, instead of like collect D or something, or, so I could see that. One thing that's a little bit weird, and I don't know if you're leading into this or if I'm cutting you off, so I'm hopefully not, is Osquery is a translation layer, so it doesn't really store data normally. So Prometheus's pull model feels almost at odds because Osquery itself doesn't generally do something like a stats-D roll up an aggregation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Except in the case of events, which are a little funny and a little different. But if you had so there's something to chew on there on like what is kind of a stats-D style backing store. So Osquery pushes to there, or maybe it's internal, and then so I don't know where you're going, but that's
Yeah, so the idea with the exporter is the exporter communicates with Osquery, and the exporter is the thing that aggregates the data. And then Prometheus pulls from the exporter, not from Osquery. Does that make more sense? So effectively, you're using the exporter as your API translation layer to another API translation layer, being Osquery. But for me, like I could see Osquery being quite a natural fit then for more complex scenarios in our use case, because we run Kubernetes because it's fashionable. No, but it works really well. So I would want to deploy Osquery like as a daemon set, so like just have one instance running per node, and then have a bunch of queries, and ultimately those queries should turn into alerting rules inside of Prometheus. So like if somebody, like let's say I'm running a bare metal Kubernetes cluster and somebody comes and plugs in a USB device, I want to know like as soon as that happens, right? So Osquery would be a fantastic use case for that. But so that's why I thought it was kind of interesting about integrating Prometheus and Osquery with this exporter layer in the middle. I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on that and see if somebody else has done this before and maybe discarded the idea, or just generally what your thoughts are around it.
Seth, you seem to be pretty plugged in here.
I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, but I also would love to hear other people's. You said that you found a Prometheus and Osquery exporter, so clearly at least one other person has done this before. Yeah. It's not the first tool I would use, but I don't know that that's wrong. I think of Osquery as being very sort of log-oriented because most of what I end up pulling back is pretty complex. So I work for Collide. Collide makes a SaaS that effectively does some of what you're talking about trying to do in Prometheus there, right? And that's a common pattern you see. Is there's a handful of companies that effectively make SaaSes that talk to endpoint agents, and whether those agents are Osquery or something more proprietary, and they're communicating the data, and then the SaaS is doing any kind of alerting. At a prior job, we built that using Graylog. So we had Osquery logs into Graylog. Graylog runs whatever alerting rules and spits out things. I think that you could absolutely do it in Prometheus, and I think it'd be really neat to see. And I always think more people should be using Osquery to generate metrics, but I don't think I've ever seen or encountered anyone doing that. Probably because there isn't, nothing's really just ready to go out of the box. But I would imagine that some of the people that run big SIEMs, or maybe the Security Onion folk or any of them, right? Fundamentally, they're just pulling data in, often from Osquery or other tools, and then maybe using Kibana. So it's a different path, but probably the same output. So maybe it's a long way of saying, I haven't seen it, but I think it could be fun to play with.
Cool. Yeah, one wonders when something isn't implemented, whether it's not implemented because nobody's thought to do it and it would be cool, or because somebody thought to do it and it's a horrible idea. So, I'm just kind of checking in. I mean, I see Osquery as playing multiple roles. So exactly like what you're saying, you do want to generate more complex, non-metric data that you would use for incident response or something like that. So you would want the log format, and we've got a logging product that I'd certainly want to integrate this with. And I think somebody from Grafana has already done a talk about integrating or about importing Osquery logs into Loki, which is our index-free log aggregation system. And so that's an interesting use case. The other one would be having an Osquery data source in Grafana. So you could actually just actually take some of those queries and dashboard them. So if you want to show a table, you can do that. If you want to, roll those up.
A couple of oddities, though. Osquery isn't inherently time series. So
yeah, it doesn't have to be for Grafana.
Even for Grafana, okay. I'm really used to Grafana being very time series oriented.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it doesn't need to be. I've got a data source kind of almost ready that I'll be publishing within the next couple of weeks, so you can play around with it. I mean, it doesn't do time series, but it can show you a current snapshot of everything that Osquery can give you, which is sweet.
Maybe a couple of, I don't know, one caveat, and then a question for you about all this. Caveat here is that some of the Osquery tables are not very performant, or they're performant on the scale of other comparable tools, but they're not performant in the scale of Grafana hammering on them. So just be cognizant that some of the underlying OS APIs are not really made to be hammered on.
Certainly.
Can't do much about that.
Indeed.
One of the other interesting things I'm wondering is you're an active SRE working for Grafana. You're probably super tied into the current observability world. And one of the things that I wonder about is Charity makes a lot of noise, right? And Honeycomb's doing a lot of stuff about effectively very wide tuples, which feel like an interesting fit for some of the Osquery stuff, because a lot of things are really here's a giant row of information. So shove that into some kind of wide thing. I don't know if I haven't used Prometheus recently enough, so I don't know if it has a sort of similar kind of schema that you might go in, or if that's where Loki comes in or anything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, caveat is I only joined Grafana Labs 2 months ago, so I wouldn't claim to be an expert in any of the products necessarily. But what I do know is that there's always going to be trade-offs. So the more labels you specify in your Prometheus metrics, that's going to lead to some inefficiency, whether that's time or space, I don't know. Probably both. But probably more on the space side of the trade-off, I'd imagine. Loki is interesting because, unlike Elasticsearch, for example, it scales very, very, very well, on minimal hardware. So because it doesn't build this massive inverted index. It's completely index free. So, pushing like petabytes of JSON into there would be, quite possible. And then to query that pretty efficiently. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I guess if I was going to build a large-scale Grafana OS query thing, I might put Loki in the middle of it, or some other OS query log to Kinesis, ingest, and shove to Prometheus kind of pattern. Loki, I don't know. I'm not building this, so
yeah, totally.
I just throw it out there that if I'm thinking about OS query and Prometheus, I would think about monitoring the performance of OS query, which is something that folks are keenly interested in, and I know that some of the bigger orgs are using things like C groups to constrain the performance. OS query has got the watchdog, but also people, I think, have very little visibility. Like there's good ways to limit, but there's not good ways, I think, right now to have visibility. And Osquery does expose some of that data. And if you can figure out good ways to present that through Prometheus, Grafana, or any part of the stack, to me, that would be very, very interesting.
I mean, we could go another route with this and actually expose some Prometheus metrics from the Osquery program itself, and then just have Prometheus scrape it directly. So that wouldn't cover the use case that I'm thinking about, where I want to write my own queries and have those exposed. But if you just want to display what Osquery itself is doing, yeah, totally, I can see that idea having weight. And it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't know if there are client libraries for C++, but there must be.
I suspect the not straightforward part is getting the data out of OS query. But I think it's a great idea. I think Zach's sort of hit on something of exposing application metrics is brilliant.
I mean, there's potentially some conflict with the model as well. Like Prometheus wants to pull the data, but everything in terms of remote APIs and OS query involves the OS query agent reaching out to do it. So that's like opposite control from what Prometheus is used to. So I don't know what kind of challenges that makes. I see Seth making faces, so maybe Seth, here.
I mean, I think it would be totally, well, so you're right, but I also think it would be totally reasonable to stick a config option in OS query that was allow connections from localhost on this port to, scrape metric data. It's like a common pattern you'd see. And I'd even be fine saying if you care about security or something there, proxy it with something for now, or it's kind of a first tier. So I guess I'm okay with that, because I feel like that's a really common pattern in a lot of the software that I encounter across all the languages, right? Of you want to open a metrics scraping port, okay, it's on you.
Yeah, luckily that isn't too sensitive as well, so hopefully shouldn't give people too much pause. But cool, thanks. I'm busy working actively on the data source, like I say, and on the exporter. The exporter is still very old school. It's currently just shelling out to Osquery I and running the command and returning it in JSON format. So I've added a PR. I think Shavil sent a link. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Sorry. Posted a link to the GitHub repo there. I've got a PR that's open that will expose the Thrift API. So now you can probably figure out why I was submitting those PRs the other day. Yeah, hopefully by the next office hours, I can give you guys a demo.
The other very different direction that you could take this exporter in, and I don't know that you want to do this, is the Osquery Go SDK does have some ability to do things like, I guess maybe it's not in the SDK, maybe it's in the launcher code base, but Collide's endpoint agent is a giant Go blob that manages Osquery D under the hood and then communicates by thrift to it. So that's a thing I work on. It's a thing Zach used to work on. So there may be things in the APIs there in the Go SDK.
Could you link me to that? I don't know if I've stumbled. That's not the Collide Osquery client library, is it? Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Collide
And I
slash
believe-
Osquery Go.
Yeah, maybe if you can send the link just to make sure I'm not looking at something different. But yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, we need to transfer the Osquery Go stuff into the foundation, but we haven't done it yet. I think I'm just supposed to do that one of these days.
Yeah, if I remember, I think we approved it on a vote sometime
We
recently.
did.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, this is what I'm using already. Yeah, it's nice. Thanks.
Well, awesome. Thanks for the great question. And anything else in there? Or?
There's bits and pieces, but I think I'll rather just show it working, and then it will maybe make some of the ideas more clear instead of just chatting about it.
The next item I see on our agenda is discussion about config options, whether they're for flags or conf. I think I saw Ben join, so he's got questions about that.
Yep, I'm here. There's a Slack thread where someone asked that, so I thought I would just open that up to everyone here and see if anyone has any general rules that they use when setting up these config files.
So this is about like someone running a site install. What are they likely to do? Not something about like if we were building a new option, where would we put it?
Yeah, it's kind of like you can stick some of the flags in like osquery.flags. You can actually stick them in the config file. So some people are wondering, where does it go? Is there any general rule of thumb of where certain config settings should go? So I just wanted to open that up. If anyone has any general guidance that they could pass on to the community, because I thought it was a good question, so I wanted to ask it here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's explicitly stated in the docs anywhere, and if it's not, it should be. But when you run osquery d-help, you see the two sections of flags, of options. The first section, those must be specified in the flag file or as flags to osquery d, and the second section, it can be set in either.
Didn't know that.
That's the rule of thumb, or at least that's how it's supposed to work. I think it doesn't. Yeah, Steph nodding. I think. I mean, I can tell you, it's mostly pretty certain that something that falls in the first section will not work if set in the options or is set in the config, and it's less certain, I would say, that something in the second section actually respects changes after startup.
So I'll say that, so Uptick's opened a bug in an issue a little while ago that we never dealt with, where the thing that is supposed to enforce something being flags only might not actually work. So there are things documented as being a flag only, which will work in the config. We consider this a bug and we haven't fixed it. We also think almost everything that is documented as being a flag only should be in the config. So we've kind of dragged our feet on like resolving that dilemma.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd maybe say to someone running a site is you can distribute the configuration through the Osquery through a TLS endpoint, whereas you can't distribute flags through a TLS endpoint. So
that's actually a good point, actually.
If there are things you want to like make sure are set on the client, then doing it one way versus the other. And I forget which one ends up overriding the other. So like that's a thing to double check.
Configs would override anything in the flag file assuming it's one of those things that is actually able to be changed.
So that
And
would
I
mean,
think
I was going to say, so that would mean a
ahead,
server can always override the setting someone has set on a client.
correct. A server can always do that as long as the Osquery code allows it. And I think the way to think about that conceptually is just think about the order that they're loaded. Flags are loaded first, and then configuration is loaded later and overrides anything in flags.
I did confirm that by playing with the file carve utility in Fleet, with changing how big of a file you can upload. So yeah.
Yeah, we have several to-dos here to make that more clear in the options, to have a warning or an error when the options are parsed by the config. Is anyone like able to take those on as an action item? I think it would be easier if like one person handled this set of improvements. All right, we'll leave it as to-dos then.
Taking notes into our minutes from this.
At least from my end, I was going to add this little discussion to a blog post of mine since people have asked about this. So I think I can take whatever I create in a blog post and hopefully push that upstream to the main docs, which I don't know if it's clear or not. I can't remember if I looked it up or not. I don't know if it's clear. So maybe if it's not clear, make it a little bit more clear, but at least push that upstream for you guys, documentation wise.
Yeah, I just looked. There's like one paragraph that covers this, but I don't think that's enough. Like something as important as this should have a little bit more attention, either visually in the docs or just a little bit more explanation so that people sort of understand the nuance here. Well, if I could help out with the blog post, what I would add also from like a conceptual point of view is that flags are intended to define the startup behavior of Osquery. So this actually doesn't exist, but it's easy to think about it like this. If you wanted to determine what user Osquery starts as, it's like you could only make that decision once at startup, whereas options are intended to be things that can be changed dynamically. So if you sort of look at the set of flags and options, the intention is that flags are startup only, and you don't want to change those at runtime. Versus options you can. Like Zach mentioned, though, that is not strictly enforced. So if you went to look in the code at the usage of some flags and options, you might find that the code actually properly handles a dynamic change to a startup only flag.
I mean, it makes me wonder, though, if I think about other software projects like Apache or something, right? You know, you might end up with configuration settings that are sort of processed early on so that they can then take effect. And that, like, I could imagine saying, well, I want to set the user in the config file. So maybe we should get like an init section of the config file for that use case or something.
I hear what you're saying. I think that's the function of the flags file, because config, again, is something that could be loaded from the file system, loaded from the network. It's designed as a plugin. So we really don't know where to discover those extensions, you know, which one to actually load from until you're kind of far into Osquery's execution, which is why the specific config plugin you'd like to use is a startup only option.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And for folks who want to be able to modify those things through like a remote server, I'll just say I'm working on trying to figure out how that we can do that sort of thing through Fleet. And it probably it involves you know, doing things similar to what Launcher does in terms of executing the Osquery process.
Launcher control channel.
Yeah.
Anything else on flags versus settings? Okay. Any other broad questions, issues, PRs? Okay. Down in agenda land, kind of had two things I wrote down. One of them is there's been some talk of a 461 release, so I was curious what we were thinking on that.
So the strong motivator request for 461 is to change the linking on Windows from dynamic to static. It's sort of a bug that kind of fell through the cracks here. So we fixed that and by landing a change to CMake. I think we should release a 461 that has that change, just because what we're hosting right now in 460 is not going to be widely compatible. I don't know much about Windows, but I'm guessing that it would only work on the Windows that we built it for.
Someone came to us to tell us that it broke the runtime. Extensions were failing at runtime because of the disconnect in C runtime. At runtime, execution time, it was failing. So they were able to build it, and then they're confused why it wasn't running. So there's a valid reason there.
I'm currently rebuilding TED the 460 to see. I've been looking at the CMake docs. I think that we can just specify via the CMake command line flags to do the static linking. I'm pretty sure we can, which means I should be able to reproduce a clean 460 that's signed. That should fix this.
Do we
That's awesome.
do we have a mechanism to, when we sort of designed the current release process and versioning, I'm not sure we have a, what do we increment? I feel weird just being like, this is the same version number, but magically the binary is different.
Well, the places where I feel like that would matter for Windows is the chocolatey release. I mean, and the site, but we can hot swap out the site. Chocolatey doesn't let us replace versions and hot swap out. I know that what you're saying is important, right? Like if we published a version with a digest, we should stay consistent with that. But if it's bad, I feel like I can reproduce it. The version is still clean and it's just different compile options. I think that's okay. We're going to do, I guess we're doing a 461. So that's the correct solution here is we do the 461 and we ship it. But given we haven't done too broad of a deployment with 460, and correct me if that's an incorrect statement, I can just re-roll 460 and re-sign it and it will look clean. But happy to do whatever we want.
I think this is the discussion that we should have right now, which is, on Linux, we're kind of set up well here. We do have a build revision baked into how we release. On macOS and on Windows, we don't have that. So it's just the version. So we should at least take a follow-up item to bake in a release number there so that we can handle this more gracefully in the future. But right now, the proposal or the choice we make is, do we tag 461? That's complex because there's some refactors that have landed into master since 460 between the two changes. So the fix, or the way that we address that, is make a branch, pull that specific commit into it, tag 461 from there. Or do we just change the Windows binary, rebuild, replace the hash and the artifact on S3? My vote is for the latter, just because we didn't really set ourselves up for success here. That's the easiest easiest thing, and we create the minimum amount of precedent for ourselves. I think that branching and pulling a commit in is something we've tried to design against, but we should open it up for discussion.
My recollection is that we roughly said we'll solve this problem when we get to it. So we didn't really have any solution in mind.
I mean, the concern is that if you were to just tag 461 from master now, there's been some substantial refactoring and more than you might expect for a patch release. What if we just tag a minor version release?
I think at least I would say my concern is not about implication from the SemVar, but instead about code stability.
I mean, I think someone would want to install 460 without the issue on Windows. So, and without anything else on it. I think that's the main reason we want to put the less stuff on that release possible. I mean, on my for me, I'm in favor actually to use a separate branch with only a special branch to tag and release the Osquery from. I mean, this is actually pretty common for several open source projects, or like, I don't know, LLVM itself. Yeah, so I don't have anything against to just redoing 460.
We could, so when we configure CMake, we can change the version. We can set the version to whatever we want. We could set Windows to 4.6.0-2, which is what we would do if we had to rebuild the Linux. So Linux uses a revision of 1.linux, and that's intended to be there for any build-specific changes we would need to make, which this is a build-specific change. So that changes our versioning scheme for Windows, so it does introduce a precedent there. But at least what we've released in the past for 460 is different from what we're going to release right now. And it would assist people if they've installed this already for testing in upgrading cleanly. Nick, your keyboard is very loud.
Oh, sorry, everyone. Sorry about that.
No,
What's the precedent you're worried about setting?
I'm not actually. Yeah, let me rephrase that. I'm not worried about setting precedent. I just want to be mindful that in this instance, a couple of decisions lead us to setting precedent.
So it's that we have not, at least not recently, recently all of our Windows builds have looked like 4.6.0, and this would introduce one that was like 4.6.2.
4.6.0-2.
-2. Yeah.
Yeah.
The only problem there is that I don't think Windows, I don't know if it's the MSI itself or it's Wix, the
MSI
it doesn't like that kind of version with the -2. It expects probably a 3 or 4 dot. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if you did that with Chocolate,
version.
that would have to be qualified as a pre-release.
Okay, so we could do dot. So in Windows, the dot is our dash in better operating systems. I mean, other operating systems. Yeah.
It's different. Windows isn't SemVar. It's explicitly this 4-part dotted notation. I've run into this as well. I'm not. It doesn't feel like a bad precedent to set, right? Like, we fundamentally have said that, well, if we screw up a build and we don't really want to cut a whole new release, we'll do something to make it not terrible. seems like the least work for everyone.
That last part of the semantic version's got to be for something, right?
Yeah. The downside here is, maybe there's some use cases out there where people have been using the last part of that versioning scheme for their own internal release cycle. But yeah.
They can step on it then.
Yeah, we'll just communicate somewhere. Hey, this is something we're doing new for the first time to handle a glitch. Expect that we'll use this in the future if we need to. I would actually do a 4.6.0.2. Yeah. Cool. Just because we're one indexed on the revisions for the other. Yeah. I don't know why we didn't decide that. That's like was decided for us. I don't know the history of this sort of semantic versionings, but for some reason, semantic versioning of revisions start at 1 instead of 0.
Okay, so the thing I just wrote into my notes here is that we think our consensus is that we should build a Windows 4602 release, and this is going to be a manual build time option on a straight 460 build.
Yes.
And we think that's the least work for everyone, and precedent seems fine to me.
And just for clarity, we are still going to build a 461 as well, right? Or no? Are we going to wait to do that?
I mean, I assume we'll build a 470 in about 2 months, unless there's a really compelling reason. Right, but if you're saying this is fundamentally about fixing a build time error that while we've now fixed in our head, like I don't know, why cut a release? It's work.
Yeah.
Okay, Teddy, I did make a bug on build time release number packaging, which I'll put a little more information into.
Awesome, thanks.
The other thing I started writing down in the agenda was we were having some conversation about CI and release improvements. I don't know if anyone wants to talk any more about that, but I wrote down the couple of things people said.
The macOS CI is now Catalina, as of 2 hours ago, I think.
Yeah, we're living in 2019 now. I wish we were, actually.
I mean, I don't know how many of you saw one of the things that my coworker Jason discovered is that Osquery reports the system version ultimately by reading a plist. And Big Sur has this weird, it's both 10.16 and 11.0.
It's quantum.
But what we discovered, right, there's now 11.1. It's not 10.16.1. It's still just 10.16. So the 10.16 version compatibility shim doesn't actually track the 11.1 change. Whether this is intentional or not, we don't know. And what's even worse, so when you go to read that plist file, the contents of the plist change based on your environmental variables.
Yep, it's the system compatibility 1 or 0. Yeah.
I feel very.
You're saying the plist data itself, the OS serves a different file.
Yep,
Depending on
there
your
are two
environment
plists.
variables.
Yeah,
That's
there are
sick.
two plists. There's a system compat equals 1, and then it changes the contents of the plist. I don't know, with hard link or something.
It can't be a hard link because
it's just like Windows.
Like you'll see it in cat. Yes, that's exactly what I think about it.
That's awesome. Whoever designed that, like, imagine the problem that they were solving, and someone's like, wait, hold on. Somewhere in the kernel, we could change exactly what this file operation read is. Like, And everyone's like, let's do it.
It's even.
Do you
so,
think that there's a performance cost to like every plist read now because it has to compare to the path that you're looking for?
probably
Yeah.
it's going to be lighter than the TCC cost.
And scan your environment too.
Yeah.
So
True.
the other piece of this is this also depends on what SDK you linked to. So I think this is like a really weird, terrible compatibility thing. And it just reminds me of like the mess that Windows is, right? Because like Apple started by saying, oh, if you have a new SDK, you get version 11, right? And if you have an old SDK, you get 10.15. Probably what Apple really started was with saying internally, everyone gets 11. And then some people were like, oh, a bunch of app developers hard-coded 10. And they were like, oh, we have to have a compatibility shim. So these apps were, you can see how this snowballs.
This will affect us because we try to keep the SDK compatibility to 10.12 or 10.13. We had 10.11 for the longest time. So I think this will affect us going forward.
This does. So Jason opened a PR to try setting that environmental variable, but he said it wasn't working right. I don't know if I don't know if the environmental variable is set in the right place for the way the plist structures all get read.
Is it per user instead of per system? Maybe?
Yeah, what makes it.
I mean, I patched launcher. We're just going to set it at launcher, which invokes Osquery. But it feels like something we should maybe think about internal to Osquery. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on that.
That was my first idea when it came up. It was like, oh, well, we should just know that this is a thing and be smart about presenting it the right way. But I don't think admins want to see 10.16. They don't expect it.
Let me see if I can find Jason's. There's Jason's PR. 6824. Yeah, so Jason says that this PR did not work.
So I think the environment variable needs to be set before Osquery starts. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but maybe it doesn't get passed on. I don't know. So if you run Osquery I with the environment variable, it works. Like on the command line, if you just have system compatibility equals whatever, and then just do Osquery IoT, then it does the right thing.
So, we'll double check. We found other exciting, weird M1 issues too. How many of you have M1 machines yet? Anyone playing with them? Wonderful. We're seeing some differences in NVRAM. We're seeing something that smells like an NVRAM table bug. I'm trying. I don't have enough of a reproduce case, so I haven't filed it. Sorry. If you select star from NVRAM, you can get back data. If you select star from NVRAM where key name equals thing, it doesn't always work.
Constraint bug?
I don't have a test case yet.
Yeah, I think NVRAM uses the IOKit APIs.
Yep, and with Big Sur, IOKit is kind of more locked down.
Yeah, I know IOKit in the past has had a lot of data race bugs that are calls of bad kernel dereferencing leads you to interesting exploitation vectors. So I could see like lockdowns just adding really broad strokes to how data is being accessed in IOKit. It might be that another process is accessing that plane, and so you just don't get data back. This is my really off the cuff.
It's weird though, because it only seems to fail with the where clause.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's the Osquery I select star from NVRAM grep X versus where key equals X. So that's weird.
There's a 90% chance it's our bug and a 10% chance it's not our bug.
Or just like a UTF encoding thing changed, and right now suddenly we're encoding it wrong for, like, I don't know. It doesn't behave this way on my dev kit, so I can't test.
It could be the CF number issue because all the data types are core foundation data types. So maybe the underlying data type changed and we are not handling it correctly anymore.
It's a good thought. Sorry, I'm still trying to type up this little select version from Osquery version on my dev kit.
Hey, I got to rock and roll right now, but I wanted to at least ask Mike, do you have everything you need for testing out Thrift and working towards a fix for that?
Yeah, I checked out your branch, built it, and on Windows, I was trying to build with extensions. I might be hitting the issue with the compiler statically linking things because I got a bunch of runtime library MT versus MD stuff in the extension files. I don't know. I'll try wiping the directory and starting again. But did you incorporate that fix into your branch yet?
That's a good question. I'll go check. I don't know. But so that brings Thrift up to 0.13.0. I think you mentioned that we need to go a little bit farther in order to get the prototype we're looking for.
Yeah, I think that 13.0 was maybe late last year or something, and then May of this year is when they added the overloaded constructor for T-pipe classes. Yeah, so I had originally started with just linking with 0.13. I increased the submodule version and I was trying to build with that. Not sure I got it correctly because it looks like you did a lot more in your branch to make that work, and I might have been taking a naive approach to updating a submodule. So I don't know.
Okay, yeah, just let me know if you get stuck on anything or.
Well, I guess we'll have to use this idea of a patch to not be on a non-release version of Thrift, right?
We could do that, or we could fast forward the submodule to that specific commit. I think I have to just go and look and see in practice which is easier.
Probably easier to do that, to fast forward the submodule.
Okay.
Probably, but it's okay if it's okay with the. I mean, if the PRs, you can do that in your PR, and then we can merge it if that's okay to settle Osquery on a sort of inter-release version of Thrift.
What I'd like to do, if folks have time, is actually land the one up there right now as is, just squash and land that. That way we get up to 0.13, and then in a follow-up we'll fast forward and see what happens there. That way, if we ever need to revert it, if we find a bug that's in the middle of their release, it's we can back up to 13 instead of going all the way back to 11.
Yeah, I think that would be. I like that idea. I looked over your changes, and I know a lot of it was auto-generated, and so I just kind of skimmed it. It's a lot of lines there, but it looks valid. Like I said, it builds for me, builds in CI.
Cool.
I wanted to test some extensions with it, and I think I just need to cherry pick in that fix for the CMake.
Yeah, just keep an eye on that supply chain. Make sure no backdoor snuck in with the auto-generated code.
Yeah.
Contemporary reference. Okay.
Sure, it's smaller than those huge ones you and I made over the summer.
Yep.
Thank you, Teddy.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to drop off too. See y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Mike, so you and Teddy are upgrading Thrift?
Well, he's upgrading Thrift more than me. I was only going to do it on a local branch so that I could try this idea that would maybe fix the ACL.
That bug on the ping bug, or is this different?
It might. So updating Thrift could fix other Thrift-related problems, and that's why I was interested in doing a little bit of testing with just what he's done so far. He's just made a PR branch where Thrift is updated to the latest release, which is almost a year old now, or maybe it's over a year old. Within that year, they also made a fix not a fix. They added a constructor overloading the class, which abstracts the thrift connection on Windows specifically to allow you to specify security on it, which is what we want to do. So the goal is to specify better than world writable security on this pipe. Thrift didn't give you a way to do that until May of this year. So he wants to land this PR that gets us to an updated version of Thrift for no other reason than give it as a better foundation to start working. Then we probably will do a patch on our submodule, or fast forward to the commit that supports this feature we want. And either way, building on that feature changed the way that pipes are instantiated. Well, the IPC, since we have an abstraction of it, yeah, on Windows specifically, yeah. That's what I was going to do. So this week, hopefully.
Sweet. I'm just writing this all down into.
It's in an issue, yeah. The hard part is updating Thrift, but we'll get there. I think if we can make an approver, we could just merge what he's done.
I mean, if y'all think it's cool.
I do. I think maybe somebody who's updated submodules before could weigh in.
I think that's all you, your team.
Yeah, I was looking at the room here.
I did the AWS lately. That was the only one. Oh.
I need to wrap my head around our module stuff, because every time I want to take a building on M1s, I'm like, oh, submodules. But
yeah, I know that the submodule where it's pinned in terms of the upstream repo is not present in a file, and it messes with me because when I get frustrated with the state of Git and things, I throw out a directory and reset head, but that doesn't reset the submodule. It's still in this weird state where it puts the files back, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, there are different things. So if nothing changed, you haven't moved the submodule head, or even if you did, you can. There are the git submodule subcommands. So, for instance, there you can git submodule the init, and then pass the path to the submodule, the problematic submodule that will delete and unregister the submodule. And then when you rerun CMake, it should pull the latest version of the submodule. Or you can also do git submodule update if you haven't done. So there are different cases. For instance, if you have changed files manually inside the submodule, the git submodule update would not work to get back to the original state. And then, so you would, unless, I don't know if there's a force somewhere, but anyway, you would use git submodule dinit and then submodule update -- init, for instance, or run CMake. For every other case where the submodule simply changed version, you again use git submodule update. Although there's a caveat, and which is probably always better anyway to. So there's a caveat where if the root submodule have changed and you somehow know that there aren't any other nested submodules, or that any nested submodule did not change, then you can just use git submodule update. Otherwise, you have to update recursively, but you cannot do it. Well, you can, but I would not suggest to do it through git submodule update -- recursive, because we purposely do not always clone all the nested submodules, because many of them we do not need. And in that way, it will try, in theory, it will try to clone them too. So in general, probably the most, it always works way is probably to do git submodule dinit. with the path, and then let CMake download it again. And although I'm lying, sorry, I know it's a bit more complex on that side too, because there's also the state on the build folder where if that submodule has patches, you if you update okay, unless you git submodule the init, the patch won't be, the submodule won't be copied again into the build folder and will not be patched. I should check actually.
It should be written somewhere.
I mean, it could be
in general, if you delete everything, it should always work. It's the best approach, because if there are patches inside or anything going on, if you force it on everything, it should always work.
Yeah.
Deleting things from the file system, if they're submodules, leaves them pinned at whatever commit they were pinned at before. And it leaves like something in your unstaged modifications in your Git database. So when you do a Git status, it says, well, you're on head, but you still have modifications, and you can't undo that without like throwing out the repo and locally recloning it, unless you know how to use these Git submodule commands, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you can even check out the submodule if there are no changes inside.
Yeah.
But yeah, the one that should always work is the init. The reason we do not re-init everything manually is that in Windows you cannot clone all the repositories of the submodules. Some of them do not work. So I always use the init.
If I have a stale submodule with changes, I just stash them and then check out whatever SHA there is, and just treat it like a normal Git repo when I'm inside that directory. And then if I go out of it, the Git status is clean again.
Okay.
Yeah, in the end, the submodule is a repository. Is a normal repository. You can, so the command I have given, I was speaking about, you use them when you are in the parent repository. So in the Osquery repository on the root folder, you can control the various submodules with those subcommand git submodule something. If instead you can also move inside the folder where the submodule is, and then again, it depends on the situation. For instance, it happened to me that I had to do changes to the code of the submodule, but then I'm not interested in them anymore. So you have multiple ways to go about it. One is the one I've told you previously, like git submodule the init from the Osquery repo folder, or if you are inside the submodule itself, you can give git reset -- hard head.
I have found
we'll also drop everything.
I have found git reset -- hard does not always solve my problems with modules, and I think it was you, Stefan, that recommended I just init and then let CMake fix it, and that worked. But like, I've run into weird stuff where like reset hard submodule init, just like somehow they get themselves too confused. So DNet, let's CMake handle it.
I'm willing to take the blame. Maybe if submodules are an essential part of working in Osquery or developing in Osquery, maybe that is worthy of a wiki page and the wiki for the developer's part.
Probably. I find that like if I'm changing branches and running builds and there's submodule changes, like it all just goes to hell. I'm just like, why?
Me too. Yeah, I delete the build every time. I actually have I have 2 or 3 copies of the Osquery repo, so that I don't have to deal with this. Like I don't have to switch branches within any individual repo. That's how bad it is. So
we have used the submodules because they seem to be easier to work with, and they were initially, but then we started having to patch things. And then we noticed that the repositories were huge, so we started adding the shallow support. But then we noticed that some Git versions didn't work as expected. We fixed it, and then we noticed that some repositories didn't work correctly and didn't report the correct things when trying to shallow clone. So in short, we can probably look into maybe making a blueprint issue on switching to tarbles. I mean, we can still get them from the Git release pages. And I'm wondering if they are easier to host. We were talking with a customer last week. They liked the submodules. They didn't like the fact that all the modules pointed at external repositories that they cannot easily reproduce locally. And having like maybe a cache locally somewhere where you can easily you just download all the tarbles, you save them in this directory, and then you can have a CMake option that instead of trying to get them from a specific URL, which may be configurable, they can also be taken from this cache directory.
Wasn't that part of your original intent in the layers?
Yeah. What was? That was the question, I think.
Having a chance to download things from a specific folder or URL. This was back when we still had Facebook with experimental branch, so we had to support both our own dependencies and the ones from Facebook.
It's also a path towards like the Arch mandate that everything be system packages and all of the various OSs that are just like, you have to use our version of this.
So I don't know whether this would help. Probably not much, because we would still be using our own dependencies. We would just be switching from one method to the other.
I guess the other thing is I feel like the thing I always want is to ship precompiled dependencies.
Yeah, we talk about this. It would be nice to have them. My only gripe is usually that it is hard to invalidate the precompiled dependencies in a reliable way.
It doesn't seem any harder than it is to invalidate a tarball. You just change the version number you're pointing at.
Yes, but we also have things like compilation flags or things that are inherited from maybe the compiler setup you're using. So, for example, maybe you have built the dependencies with one toolchain, then you switch to another toolchain. Maybe it links, but in the end it doesn't work, and you don't know why.
I mean, it's like the same way you do a CC cache or something, right? Or any of the other build caches, is you declare all the stuff that matters, you hash it, and you look for it under the hash.
Yeah, I mean, it always sounds straightforward, but when you actually try to look into it, C++ and C itself, they are not easy to deal with this stuff.
CMake that kills me. I can't CMake. I'm just like, it's like worse than Bash.
So no, that's not it. The problem is with the tool chains. So mainly the tool chain. So for the CC cache example, the tool chain have a ton of flags, different flags, and you have to think which one makes sense to hash. If they change, I care about them, or I care not about them. The hash should change. And so there's a huge amount of flags that you could find on an input line and that you have to handle. And this is particularly problematic. I mean, if you see CCCache or SCCcache projects, they do have their own big issues. So preparing something that can easily take all these flags and give a hash that doesn't change every build you do, it's not that easy. And at the same time, that it changes when you want it to change. So yeah, we were thinking about we were coming at a point so we can hash the CMake cache txt file, which is the input for CMake. You can cache, for instance, all the CMake lists txt for the libraries. And yeah, the first problem, for instance, the CMake list.txt, you include other CMake, you can include other CMake files inside that CMake list. And you have to then probably write a parser to understand which other CMake files are included, and so recover those.
I'm coming from, I think most of the time Osquery is being built in a very small number of environments that are very stable, right? Like CI. Osquery gets built in CI a lot. So anything we can do to start getting those build times down seems valuable. So like I don't particularly care about solving the problem of how can we cache dependencies in a built fashion for like every possible use case, right? I care about the very small use cases we have that are highly repeatable.
My idea was to try and do this as best as we can in a way that never breaks releases, meaning that we can use these pre-built packages on a CI and on the developing machine and revert to the source-based build, a full one, when generating releases. That would probably put my mind at ease so it doesn't break.
Yeah, but the problem was mainly detecting when you have, for instance, for a CI, but also for a developer, when the pre-built libraries they have downloaded are not right for the setup they have. Because again,
yeah, sure, but I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% correct if it is just for development purposes. As long as we always use the correct process to build things, we will eventually catch the error. And I mean, the problem is that with the latest changes on the AWS, we have a build time that is like 1 hour and 40, sometimes 2 hours on Windows. And it is starting to get extremely hard to build.
This feels sort of intractable too, because like when we talk about, if you talk about extensions and an extension is some tiny C library, right, that is like one source file, like that takes no time and no one cares. But when you start talking about like the AWS SDK or like, I don't know what the next one will be, right? Those are, as you said, it's like a 2-hour build potentially.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the next giant SDK that we'll pull in is, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Let's hope no. Especially because then we have to rewrite everything in CMake. But yeah, it will happen sooner or later. And we were actually, Stefan was actually thinking about blocking the release until we had a solution for this. And it's something we have to look into, definitely. It's not something we can keep as it is.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't help more. CMake and C++ are a little alien to me.
Yeah, C++ developer cannot be helped. It's a curse.
You know, I enjoy Go. Go makes this, it's got different problems, but not this one.
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, the idea too of having tarballs, and then you could easily imagine like a CMake source layering that said, you know, for this dependency you want tarball X, it should have checksum this thing, and like here's places to get in. You could imagine something.
That is how we reinvented Brew in CMake.
we could bring Buck back. Surely Buck solves this for us.
Yeah.
But But I,
No,
you know,
it makes sense. We should go down that route.
like ignoring the precompiled thing, just thinking about solving the problem where people are like, oh, I want a hermetic build, right? I don't want to reach out to things off-prem. I wonder though, so some of the security teams I've worked with in the past have not just wanted to use the local mirrors of open source software, but would tend to lag versions because their security teams would be like, well, we vetted this version of this library. No, you can't have the newer one.
More than security, I think the issue they had was that if they go back in a year, maybe those repositories are no longer there, or maybe they have been moved or migrated. We have seen some repositories switching from GitHub to GitLab, vice versa. And they would have to fix the remotes on their own, assuming they are compatible, because maybe during the move, they broke something and it doesn't work anymore.
So they're not coming from a security perspective of like wanting a vetted set of source code.
Yeah, it's just a way to make sure they can reproduce the builds in a couple of years.
Okay, that's an easier problem.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I should probably go, but nice to chat with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
We are 25 minutes late, sorry.
Yeah, a holiday edition special. Yeah.
Surprisingly long meeting for the holidays.
Yeah.
Well, have a good one, everybody.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.